my Ecomm Learners! Welcome to another learning journey with Teacher Claire. If it's your first time here today, I would certainly be glad to have you with me as we explore the Philippine literary forms, genres, elements, and traditions. So what are you waiting for? Click the subscribe button, like and share this video to anyone you know would benefit from it, then let's get the ball rolling. To start with, let me define four major terms relevant to our discussion today. One is literary forms. Literary forms refer to its structure and to the manner in which it is made, as opposed to its substance or what it is about. Meaning to say, it is centered in how the literary piece is written, whether it is written in sentences and paragraph form or in lines, stanza, and verses. The second is literary genres, and these are categories that authors use to describe the primary content and tone of their writing. The genre an author chooses can help them determine what type of plot, characters, and setting to create. Literary genres typically describe the writing styles. Meanwhile, literary elements refer to the components of a literary work. These are technical terms for the who, what, when, where, and how of a literary work, like who are the people involved in the story, when and where did the most essential situation in the story occur, and many more which we will discuss one by one. Lastly, the literary traditions. It is the constant production of new works added from era to era or generation to generation. These refer to stories that have been passed down for ages and as a result are commonly shared throughout the world. Ponder these four important terms which are connected to our lesson discussions today. Moving forward, there are two major forms of literature which are prose and poetry. Prose, in contrast to poetry, this literary piece applies a natural flow of speech and grammatical structures which are mainly consisting of complete sentences arranged logically and sequentially in a paragraph form. There are two types of prose: fiction and non-fiction. When we say fiction, it is a product of the writer's wild imagination and creative thinking. The author describes imaginary events and people, so it's not based on factual situations. Its three types are short story, novel, and novella. The main genres are crime, fantasy, romance, science fiction, western, inspirational, historical fiction, and horror. The other one is non-fiction. It is the total opposite of fiction. These are stories inspired by real events where the writers or authors aim to present, interpret, or describe experiences based on facts. Its types are essays, journals, diaries, feature articles, editorials, and the like. Let's move on to poetry. Poetry is a literary form usually written in lines and is characterized by having the element of rhythm, sound, imagery, and form. Its main purpose is to express feelings, thoughts, and ideas. It can be divided into three types: narrative, dramatic, and lyrical poetry. When we say narrative poetry, it is a poetry that tells a story and has the elements of a narrative such as characters, setting, conflict, and many more. While dramatic poetry is an emotionally appealing drama written in verse that tells a story and is intended to be recited or sung in front of the audience by a character speaking in poetry. And the last one is lyric poetry. It is the most common type of poetry that focuses on expressing feelings rather than telling a story. Now look at this simple graphic organizer showing the essential information about prose and poetry, which are the two major forms of literature. This time, let's deal with literary genres. Genre is the classification and organization of literary works into the following categories. We have poetry, drama, prose, fiction, and non-fiction. The works are divided based on their form, content, and style. So how do you identify literary genres? Literary or written works are classified as being part of a particular genre based on a number of things. Number one, the tone of the writing. It typically refers to either the mood implied by an author's language and word choice, or to the way that the text can make a reader feel. Does the literary piece make you happy, sad, hopeful, or disgusted? So that is what we call the tone of the writing. The writing style is the second one. It tells us whether the literary piece is persuasive, or is it convincing you to believe on a certain thing, or is it narrative? Does it relate a story? Or maybe expository, explaining things, or descriptive, which simply describes a person, thing, or situation. The next one is narrative technique. These are methods and literary devices a writer uses to craft the elements of a story. The common techniques relevant to plot, which is the sequence of events that make up a narrative, include the following: backstory, flashback, flash forward, and foreshadowing. On the other hand, the common techniques relevant to narrative perspective or who is telling the story include the first person, second person, third person, and third person omniscient. The next one that we have to consider so as to identify the genre of a literary piece is the length. It simply refers to how long or short the literary text is written. The last one is the content, what the written work is about. The last one is the content. It only tells us what the written work is about. For example, is it about war, history, or romance? And those are the important ideas you need to remember when we talk about genres of literature. That's it for today. I'll be with you again next time, my Ecomm Learners. And in my next video lesson, we'll talk about the elements of literature. Remember that happiness is a choice, so always choose to have a happy heart. God bless you, my Ecomm Learners.